and gentlemen, we'll start the side event very soon. Please take your seats. Thank you. Yes, yes. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining all over the world. Welcome to the side event, Financing Wetlands Conservation and Restoration for Climate Benefits, Challenges and Opportunities, taking place here in the Republic of Korea Pavilion in the UNFCCC COP26 venue. My name is Byum-sik Yu. I'm a senior advisor in the Secretariat of the Convention on Wetlands. For today's program, we'll have a welcoming remark from the host, the Government of Republic of Korea, and an opening remark by the Secretary General of the Convention on Wetlands. We'll continue with a moderated discussion with distinguished panelists, followed by a Q&A session where we allow a few questions from the Zoom link and other participants joining through the YouTube. This event is the first of the 3 side events that is being prepared by the Convention on Wetlands in this year's COP26. If you're interested to know more about our engagement here in COP26, please visit our convention website at www.ramsar.org. Before we start, I would like to share a few housekeeping notes. Today's event is held in hybrid format. While we have most of our guests and panelists here on site with us, it is also in Zoom webinar format. This event is also broadcasted live on YouTube and is being recorded to be available after the event. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the panel discussion. If you have any questions for the presenters during the panel discussion, please use the Q&A feature on Zoom. Please do not use chat option for this purpose, as our team will not monitor the chat section for questions. The audience watching the panel on YouTube may also submit questions via the chat feature on YouTube. If you have any questions, technical questions, or facing technical difficulties, please reach out to our IT support directly via the private chat function on Zoom. With that, let me invite Mr. Jong-soo Yoon for his welcoming remark. Mr. Yoon is a former Vice Minister of Environment of the Republic of Korea, and then also served as the head of UN Office of Sustainable Development under UN DESA. Currently, he is a senior advisor at Kim & Chang Law Firm, which is the biggest law firm in Korea. He has recently been elected to the Council of IUCN Governing Board. Please welcome Mr. Yoon.
Thank you, Mr. Yu. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Korea Pavilion. This conference, COP26, puts more emphasis on the nature than any of the previous sessions. Wetlands, in particular, has long been recognized for providing excellent ecosystem services and supporting a wide range of biodiversity. The world now is paying attention to their value as carbon sinks that will help us overcome the climate crisis in a sustainable way. In that regard, today's side event is very meaningful, even more so by participation of all the distinguished speakers who are joining us today. I'd like to express my special thanks to those special guests as well as everyone in the audience. Many thanks also go to all the staff members of the Ministry of Environment of Korea and the Secretariat of Convention on Wetlands for preparing this event. Korean government, having long recognized the importance of the benefit from the nature as carbon sinks, has amended the Wetland Conservation Act and allocated $20 million on wetland management, including the designation and maintenance of wetland protection areas and purchasing private lands. The Korean government also announced the Green New Deal as part of the Korean New Deal on July last year. In accordance with the new framework, the government will invest $52 billion by 2050 on policies on the nature and ecosystem-based greenhouse gas mitigation and adaptation, including expanding carbon sinks such as wetlands, expanding protected areas, and enhancing their management, and strengthening R&D for nature-based solutions. Such policies are expected to provide guidelines for the government, businesses, and communities to promote actions and lead to effective investment for nature-based recovery. After announcing the 2050 carbon neutrality, Korea enacted the Act on Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth against the climate crisis, demonstrating our climate policy framework for mainstreaming carbon neutrality and biodiversity. This will create the momentum for effective actions. As you are well aware, the climate actions are linked to the nature by expanding nature-based carbon sinks, not only forests, but also wetlands, meadows, settlements, and rivers. So as a council member of IUCN, I'm pleased to hear that Korea will strive to integrate the nature into the 2050 carbon neutrality scenario and the 2030 NDC as a midterm target. Distinguished guests, nature-based action, climate actions, including wetlands, is a long-term and a sustainable way to overcome this unprecedented crisis. For this, governments will need to make efforts to develop systematic strategies and institutional foundation in order to set right direction and effectiveness of investment. In addition, international organizations in the finance sector will also need to identify the best way to ensure effective financial mobilization that puts the nature first. In this side event, representatives from governmental and financial organizations will share experience and perspectives discussing how to integrate the nature into investments on climate change and how to conserve wetlands with high cost effectiveness. I hope that this side event will serve as the first step for stakeholders to work together to find these financial opportunities so that wise investments can be made to enable green recovery of the earth before it's too late. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yu. Now, I would like to invite Ms. Martha Rojas Orego, the Secretary General of the Convention on Wetlands, for her opening remark. She will be joining us virtually. Martha?
Thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you, Mr. Yun, for these opening remarks. I would like to welcome all of you to our event on this important issue of financing wetland conservation and restoration for climate change benefits. So it's very timely in the context of the COP where you are attending today. So I would like to start by thanking the Ministry of Environment of Korea for hosting this critical discussion. And I would like to thank also Patricia Zurita, the CEO of BirdLife International, a key partner in our work in the convention, for moderating this event. I have to say that it is very encouraging to hear from Mr. Yoon what we are celebrating in terms of the commitment of the Republic of Korea's goal to reach carbon neutrality by 2050, and including and committing wetland restoration as part of that. And we heard also the many initiatives that the government has in place. And I have to say that the Republic of Korea is also a very active member of the Convention on Wetlands. It is encouraging, and we are seeing that more countries are incorporating wetland restoration in their NDCs and adaptation plans, 21 countries so far, but we still need more commitment and finance to scale this very important nature-based solution. Because as you know, we need wetlands to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement and to keep the global warming to 1.5 degrees. We will not be able to do it if we don't protect and restore this critical ecosystem. As you know, wetlands are perhaps an ecosystem that has not been known as well as other ecosystems, but which we have evidence of the powerful nature-based solution that it is in terms of mitigating carbon emissions. We know that they are key to achieving net zero and to limit, as I mentioned before, the increase of temperatures to 1.5 degrees. And to give you an example, a particular kind of wetlands, which are peatlands, are the world's most carbon-dense terrestrial ecosystem. They only cover 3% of the land, but they store 30% of the land-based carbon. And this is twice as much as all the world's forests combined. And if we look at blue carbon ecosystem, coastal ecosystems, we know that the sediment carbon burial rates are 55 times faster than in tropical forests. And wetlands are not only important for mitigation, they are also key for adaptation. Wetlands are key in protecting communities from extreme events. And we have examples like coral reefs, which provide protection worth $34,000 per hectare every year. And inland wetlands that absorb, they are like sponges that absorb the excess rainfall, and they help reducing floods and provide water during dry seasons, which is absolutely important for adaptation of many communities in the world. We also know that they are cost-effective solutions, and there is evidence also on the role, for example, that mangroves have in helping stem rising seas. And we know that by using this nature-based solution, we could save $248 billion a year, which is more efficient than concrete heavy infrastructure. However, despite these benefits, wetlands are the most threatened ecosystem today. We have lost 35% of the world's wetlands area just between 1970 and 2015 alone, at a rate that is 3 times faster than forests. And we're losing blue carbon ecosystems such as mangroves and seagrasses at an average rate of 1.5 to 2% per year. And this has impact on our ability to achieve the Paris goals. We know that 50 million hectares of peatlands are currently being drained, and this causes 4% of all anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions, 4%. According to our technical panel, we need to protect the remaining intact peatlands and restore 50 million hectares of drained peatlands by 2030 to achieve the Paris Agreement. So the evidence is very clear. And this is where the Convention on Wetlands has a key role to play, because it is a platform, it is a legal treaty that involves 172 contracting parties who are committed to conserving, using wisely, and collaborating to conserve this important ecosystem. They have also taken very specific decisions to recognizing the role of peatlands and blue carbon ecosystems in the last COP in 2018 as key for addressing climate change. And there is a conviction that we need to use these ecosystems as part of the nationally developed, to the NDCs, and so that we can reach the ambition of the Paris Agreement. Under the strategic plan of the convention, the parties have also identified the need to build capacities and knowledge and to scale up the knowledge that we have, but also to find finance opportunities so that conservation and restoration from public and private funds can contribute to reaching the climate change future. So with this evidence, we know that wetland protection and restoration is critical to achieve the Paris Agreement. And here is where finance is so key. We know from UNEP's from the report that they did on finance for nature, that the investments on nature need to triple by 2030 for climate and biodiversity goals. And we need to scale up projects that we already have, as we will see in this event. We need to scale up these projects and to have more projects that show that protection and restoration of wetlands generate mitigation as well as adaptation benefits. And here at the COP26, it's very important to make this message and to ensure that we can get more commitments for the conservation of these ecosystems as part of the climate change agenda. So this is why this event is so relevant, and we are very privileged to have very good panelists today representing and to be able to share the innovative solutions that they have to overcome the challenges to allow financial flows to wetland conservation. And this includes the IKI partnership that the convention has for the countries of the Caribbean, which seek to assess vulnerability of Ramsar sites to minimize the impact of climate change. We will hear also about the Asian Development Bank, who's working with the regional Flyway initiative and with our BirdLife partner, BirdLife International partner, to conserve priority wetlands and is seeking additional funding to protect these wetlands across a very important migratory flyway path. We have also funding institutions like the Green Climate Fund. We will hear about national experience and private sector. So this is going to be a great opportunity to share experiences and solutions so that we can really use the full potential of wetlands to achieve the climate change goals, but also all the other goals that these ecosystems can contribute to, including biodiversity, food, and livelihoods. So I welcome this exchange. Unfortunately, I cannot stay until the end. I was going to be with you, but we have an extraordinary COP of the convention going on. But I wish you a very good discussion, and thank you so much for being with us in this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martha. Now let me introduce the moderator today, Ms. Patricia Zurita, the Chief Executive Officer of BirdLife International. Ms. Patricia Zurita is the CEO of the world's largest nature conservation partnership, bringing together over 100 organizations worldwide to conserve birds, their habitats, and the global biodiversity, working with people towards sustainability in the use of natural resources. Ms. Patricia.
Thank you so much, Boom and Martha and Mr. Yoon. It's lovely to be with you all. As you heard, I'm Patricia Zurita. I'm the Chief Executive of BirdLife International. And I'm delighted that I'm going to be able to moderate this very interesting dual panel. We're going to have first a discussion about funding from public, regional, and private sectors. But then we will have actually discussion about the how are we actually implementing this on the ground with experiences from the Dominican Republic, from Uganda, and from the East Asian Australasian Flyway Partnership. Let me just emphasize a couple of points, and you've heard it already from Mr. Yoon and from Martha. Wetlands are incredibly important. We are losing them at a faster pace than ever. I was shocked when I heard the statistics, and I think it came from you, Martha, at some point, but we've lost 90% of the wetlands in the last 3 centuries. 90% of wetlands in 3 centuries. And with the speed that we're losing them right now, it's even scarier. People depend on wetlands, you know this. We don't need to emphasize this, but not only in terms of climate and nature, but food security. Their agriculture and fisheries come from wetlands. Their cleaning systems for waters, the filtration systems for maintaining waters clean, but also for culture. people are related culturally to wetlands, and they're incredibly important to maintain traditional systems of use, but also traditional systems of living. Now, we cannot deny the importance of wetlands for biodiversity, and we will hear from a couple of people about the just launched or relaunched regional Flyway initiative that we are implementing with the Asian Development Bank and the East Asian Australasian Flyway Partnership Secretariat. And the importance of thinking about wetlands as an opportunity to sink carbon, mitigate climate change, but also make sure that we adapt to the changes that we're seeing already from climate. Now, to make this happen, we need money, and we need funding. And we need funding that is not only big in terms of scale and available, but accessible. And accessible not only to governments, but especially also to civil society and local communities. Making sure that we can have sources of funding that are easy to access and that are quick delivery is incredibly important. So I'm delighted that we're going to have this discussion. Martha, thank you so much for having me moderating this. I'm very happy for BirdLife to be here with you guys. Let me move on and start introducing the panelists, because this is when we are actually going to have the conversation. And if I can ask you guys to come and sit here. Let me start with Warren Evans. You have a little bit of a trek, Warren. Warren is the climate envoy of the Asian Development Bank and a special project facilitator. Warren and I have had, Warren and I have worked together for over 12 years now. He has more than 40 years of work experience in multilateral development banks, being ADB's first Director of Environment and Social Safeguards, and later as the World Bank Environment Director and Senior Advisors. He's also served on the BirdLife International Advisory Group, and it's a huge champion of conservation and making conservation happen quickly. We're not going to have right now Andreas Roman, but he will join us a little bit later. Andreas is the head ad interim of the Independent Evaluation Unit of the Green Climate Fund. The Independent Evaluation Unit ensures that the Green Climate Fund is accountable and effective. It conducts independent evaluations of the GCF activities to guarantee its accountability and synthesizes learnings. Before joining the Green Climate Fund, he was with the Center for International Forestry and Research, C4, and the German Development Bank, the German Development Agency, GIZ. Victoria Khan has kindly stepped in while Andreas joined us, and Victoria is part of Andreas' team at the evaluation unit of the GCF. And last but definitely not least, I would like to invite Carla Muller-Santop. She works for Danone's Global Water Stewardship Program. She's specifically concerned with driving private sector implementation of nature-based solutions for addressing global water challenges. A key focus of this work includes developing collective action projects at the landscape scale aimed at unlocking blended finance. This essentially entails wetland restoration and protection. At least 100 of Danone sites are directly or indirectly linked to a wetland. And I'm delighted that private sector is involved. Are we doing the 6 of them at the same time? Okay, yeah. All right, sorry. So let me introduce the 3 panelists that are coming from the implementation sector. Rosa Maria de la Cruz is the Director of International Treaties at the Ministry of Environment of the Dominican Republic, where she leads the compliance of multilateral environment agreements and coordinates the participation of the ministry at the international level. Rosa Maria is going to be speaking a little bit about the IKI initiative in the Caribbean that Martha mentioned before. And we will have Mr. Alfred Okidi from the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Water and Environment of Uganda. He's going to join us. He has a clash, so he's joining us soon, and hopefully Mr. Okidi will be able to speak to us about the Nile Basin initiative, as he is the chair of this intergovernmental partnership of 10 countries in the Nile Basin. And joining us online from Korea, we have Doug Watkins. the Chief Executive of the East Asian Australasian Flyway Partnership Secretariat. He has over 40 years of involvement in the conservation of migratory water birds and their wetland habitats. He has previously taken a variety of technical and policy roles in Wetlands International, Oceania, in the Government of Australia, in the Asian Development Bank, and now leading the 39 partners of the East Asian Australasian Flyway Partnership. So Doug is joining us online. All right. So I'm going to give you guys an initial time, about 5 minutes each, for you guys to share your perspectives from your different angles. And I am going to start with Warren. Warren, we just relaunched the East Asian Australasian Flyway initiative. Can you tell us a little bit more about this and the work that ADB is doing with wetlands?
Sure. Thanks very much, and it's great to be here. I want to thank Republic of Korea for hosting this. I also want to thank Ramsar for giving us this opportunity. You know, I've probably spoken at, I don't know, maybe 10 Ramsar events over the last 20 years, but never in a climate conference. I think it's great. It's about time, right? That we're focused on the climate element of biodiversity conservation, and in particular wetland conservation. So thanks very much for this opportunity. ADB recognizes, the Asian Development Bank, or ADB, recognizes the critical importance of the link between biodiversity and climate change, and the rapid pace that we're losing biodiversity and we're gaining climate impacts. And so we have a strategy called Strategy 2030. It's our roadmap to where we want to be by the year 2030, and that focuses on both of these. And within that strategic plan, we're developing a nature-based development roadmap, and that is hopefully going to really help ADB bring together the climate and biodiversity conservation elements of development. So how do we do nature-based, climate resilient, low carbon development in the future? In support of that, our president about 2.5 weeks ago or so announced that ADB is going to increase its commitment to climate finance from 80 billion cumulative by 2030 to 100 billion. So we increased our commitment by $20 billion. One of the reasons we were able to do that was we took a step back and we looked through our portfolio, we looked at what we're already doing, and we recognized that we really need to scale up investment in adaptation in a big way. So the bulk of that additional $20 billion is actually intended to support adaptation. A total of $34 billion out of the $100 billion will be for adaptation. And a lot of that, we don't know how much yet, but a lot of that will be for biodiversity, nature-based adaptation. And that brings me to the partnership that we have with BirdLife International and the East Asia Australasian Flyway Partnership, together with Paulson Institute and others that are going to work with us. This is Patricia called it the relaunch. I'm a big believer in launching things over and over again. You know, the more publicity you can get, the better. So we started the first launch was at the Biodiversity COP a couple of weeks ago. Then Tuesday this week we had the second launch. Who knows where the third launch will be? But this is really a critical initiative that is intended to mobilize about $3 billion over the next several years of finance from institutions like ADB, sovereign lending, private sector lending, but also equally important contributions from other potential donors, other potential partners that are interested in working together with the countries that are committed to conserving these critically important wetlands from New Zealand, Australia, up to Korea, Alaska, Russia, you name it. This is one of the big flyways that's critically threatened. And we're very excited about this because the The idea is that there's a recognition that if we don't have locally based, community-based efforts for and commitments for conservation of these wetlands, they're not going to work. But the problem is for an institution like ADB that it's very hard for us to finance something at that level, at the local level. Whereas if we can put together a package that covers a large area, but still mobilizes money for local communities, for civil society, then we think that we can actually be effectively engaged as a development finance institution at a large scale over a long period of time. And that's our intention. I think the last thing I'm going to say, Patricia, is that when you talk about finance, and you know, blended finance is the key to this. It's bringing money from lots of different sources to concessionalize hard money, bringing grant money. It's critically important that you have a combination of sources of funding. But the real core funding is from the communities and the national governments themselves. So when you look at any examples that have international support for wetland conservation or biodiversity conservation in general, the real key funding comes from the local government and the national government. It's their commitment that makes this work in the long term. So when we talk about $3 billion of funding for the what we call the Regional Flyway Initiative, this is going to, you know, we're looking at probably at least another $9 billion from national governments as counterpart financing. So you don't forget when we're talking about financing, it's not, ADB is an important source, but we're actually quite small compared to what national governments actually contribute to this. So we use our money to try and mobilize to help get the policy reforms, the institutional reforms, the capacity for governments to use their money to effectively conserve these critical wetlands over a long period of time. I'll be happy to discuss this further in the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Warren, and that's absolutely right. I think the blended finance thinking, sorry, I should have let you clap. I'm sorry. When we're talking about blending finance, it's not only about having private and public money going to governments, but also making sure that that is actually accessing local communities and local civil society and catalyzing and leveraging that funding. I'm going to do a little bit of a switch here because Andreas was able to join us. Thank you so much for coming. Andreas, just take your place. Oh, I actually introduced you already in absentia. And it's perfect timing that you have joined us because then you can actually tell us a little bit more about the Green Climate Fund, the work that you guys have been doing with the contracting parties and with the Convention on Wetlands and Ramsar. But more importantly about the role of the Green Climate Fund mobilizing resources for wetlands, for wetland restoration, wetland conservation, and how important it is to start looking into agile systems that can help us get that funding quicker to the hands that they need them. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. I should be saying first and foremost, I'm very sorry for my fellow colleague that had replaced me and is now out of the discussion. But she would just have made the same points that I'm going to make. But let me just introduce you. Let me just introduce myself really briefly. My name is Andreas Reumann. I'm currently acting head of the independent evaluation unit of the Green Climate Fund, the largest fund in the world on climate, and the financial vehicle directly under the UNFCCC. So I'm very glad to be able to speak to you on this matter. In particular, I'm always glad to speak about the learning that we have at the Green Climate Fund. And as you know, and it is perfectly set well here at the Korean Pavilion. As you know, the Green Climate Fund is also hosted by Korea and sits in the south of Seoul, in Songdo, in the Incheon area. And as we go, we have several engagements across the globe in the developing countries. And we have about 170 projects at the moment that look at anything from mitigation to adaptation and many different results areas, as we call them. all from agricultural support over to water support, infrastructural support, forestry, and many more. One thing that strikes us as an independent unit, we look at two questions. We look at the question for the GCF and asking ourselves, are we doing things right? So we constantly, as evaluators, asking ourselves, are we doing the things in a way that they are efficient and effective? But we're also asking ourselves another question, and that's the question of, are we doing the right things? So are we in the places that we should be? And here we have recently completed a global evidence study, a global evidence review that looked at climate change adaptation and looked at the question of what do we know in the global climate adaptation space. That is a very young space as well. It's only been researched and heavily researched after 2015. There's a bulk of evidence out there that can tell us about what we know and what we don't know. And here we clearly saw in an evidence gap map, and it's a very pithy sort of product that is all available on our website. And that pithy product just basically looks at all the interventions that you may have, as well as all the outcomes that you are after with projects in the adaptation space. And it tells you what sort of information is out there, what do we know, what works well. And it also tells you where the gaps are, where we just simply don't have any information. And what we found is as follows. We know we have a lot of information about agriculture support. We know how this works well. We know what sort of impacts we can make on the ground. Equally, we also know from a geographical perspective a lot about the sub-Saharan Africa. We know how African contexts can be addressed through climate adaptation interventions. What we don't know is, though, we know very little about Latin America. And we know very little about the context that we have there, because there's very little evidence and robust evidence that we can find there. And equally, we also have certain sectors that are not really well informed. So I already spoke about agriculture, that's very well informed, forestry, very well informed, as well as fishery, very well informed. Unfortunately, the water sector is hugely under researched, and there's very few studies that would really effectively speak to this. And that is a great concern for us, because the GCF is obviously interested in having a broad band of different activities and projects that would be financed through the fund. But unfortunately, there's very little that we know in this space, and therefore projects may not be as innovative as they could be. So my plea, if I could, my plea would be that we definitely ought to think about the evidence that's out there and look at the question from the perspective of the GCS as well as other funders. Look at the question of how can we fund this space, not only looking at evidence-rich components and sectors, but also looking at those that are evidence-scarce environments. And we need to look at that and learn from that. And so I would really plead for that to be something that not only the GCF but also the wider landscape is doing. The GCF is doing a great job in that respect. It's trying to be the thought leader in adaptation, trying to provide further guidance that could help. But it's certainly not enough, and it's a question where we need to come together as a whole. A second point I wanted to make, and this is my last point. I'm sorry, I won't speak much longer. It's this question of what has happened in the last years is that we've come to the Anthropocene epoch. So we've come to the realization that our activities, our human activities, are greatly impacting the environment. This is obviously quite grave, but at the same time, it's also an opportunity. And here we stand at a crossroad where we have a very complex system, human activity system, as well as a very complex environmental system. And when we talk about wetlands and the question of the Wetland Convention and Ramsar, we really truly have to acknowledge the question of biodiversity in this space. And how can we bring those two systems together? what we found is that in climate change interventions, these spaces are of course very complex, and coming together in one creates another new complex system. So in here we ought to think about this question of how are we able to predict, or first analyze, but also predict and act in such a complex system. We really truly need to think about ways on methods to better understand how we can act in such a complex system. And again, we're hoping that this could be done partially through an instrument such as the GCF, the Green Climate Fund, as it is a thought leader in the space in general, but also a convening power to bring together various funders to think about this collectively. Because what we found in most of our evaluation, evaluative work, is that on the ground, in the countries where we truly want to create that change, we're bound by this, by capacity concerns, of course, but also by this high transaction cost and high coordination costs in the country. It is difficult for countries, in particular vulnerable countries such as the SIDS, the small island developing states, as well as the least developed countries, to effectively coordinate the climate finance that could come to the country. And that is something for the future to think of, that we need to unleash and create systems and platforms where there's knowledge sharing and coherence and complementarity in our climate action. I'll keep it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andreas, and an excellent point in terms of making funding available and learning about the evidence of what's happening with wetlands. I would only say that, if anything, wetlands have been studied a lot because they have been areas that we have been involved with, as humans for a long time, and there are incredible examples of the quick restoration capacity that these systems have. So perhaps it's the case of bringing all of the data together to actually demonstrate that. And I would actually start in the United States with all of the wetland restoration program that the government has been funding for so long. So we've heard from the regional funding, we've heard from the global funding. Now I do want to bring to the table Carla from Danone, because the role of the private sector in this, in protecting and restoring wetlands is incredibly important, particularly for those private sector companies that depend on water. Danone has been a leader. I was telling you that I had the opportunity to work with Danone in Senegal many years ago, and the vision that the company has had in terms of protecting and restoring wetlands has been exemplary. So, Carla, tell us a little bit more about Danone and your vision and your relationship with wetlands.
Yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
So, first of all, thank you also for the invitation to Ramsar, to the Republic of Korea. I think it's very important to have the private sector around the table as well. And at Danone, I work for the water cycle team. So last year we launched our first ever water policy, which has very strong commitments until 2030 that we're trying to achieve at the moment. So I'm concerned with trying to make these commitments a reality. And with all these water preservation commitments that we have, wetlands are obviously a key ecosystem that we wish to restore and protect, because as we've heard in the introduction as well, over 100 production sites of Danone are directly or indirectly related to a wetland. And what we try and do is really look beyond our operations to consider the full supply chain where Danone is sourcing from, and really target the entire landscape around our production sites. And this critically entails restoring and protecting these critical ecosystems. And wetlands for us are really superstars. We like to call them like that because they are not only biodiversity hotspots but also carbon sinks, and they perform immense ecosystem services for the water that we have as an input into our production sites. So wetlands are really a key focus. But however, we know that our funding is limited to some aspect, and we think that wetlands are a specific ecosystem where we can really see a huge opportunity of collaborating together with the public sector, more than for other ecosystems. And what we need and what we believe will really help us to achieve a scaling up of investments, of financing into wetlands protection is bankable projects, as we call them. So we cannot rely on this kind of charity-style investments that we are having in a lot of restoration projects, where large companies just invest a sum of money into a specific area. But we really need to develop a business case for wetlands restoration, and that's where we would like to increase our cooperation with the public sector, because we think that we lack proof points of these business cases on the ground. So as we've just heard, we have a lot of studies, we have a lot of scientific evidence of all the critical ecosystem services that these wetlands can provide, but at the moment we lack a clear business case. And a clear business case, for example, could be achieved through demonstrating that the carbon benefits that we have from wetlands restoration could be integrated into carbon markets, or that we could in some regions cooperate to develop pilot projects where we can really prove that wetlands are a cost-effective and sustainable alternative to the traditional or conventional wastewater treatment infrastructure that we normally build. So I think we know about all the benefits that wetlands can provide, but at the moment we lack these pilot projects, we lack these proof points where we can prove these hypotheses. And we believe that if we implement more of these pilot projects in critical regions, we can then really leverage funding from all different kinds of sources. We know that impact investors are really at the starting line. They're really trying to engage into investing in these projects, but they require as well this business case and this proof of concept. And that's where we would increasingly like to cooperate in order to develop this and really demonstrate the true business case that can be behind wetlands restoration.
Super, thank you so much. All right, before we go into the implementation side, let's take this funding discussion a little bit further, because we heard from Warren about the importance of using funding as a catalytic. The funding from Asian Development Bank, for example, and other bilaterals as catalytic for mobilizing funding at the local level, whether it is local governments or funding that actually can get to local communities. And we heard from Andreas the importance of ensuring that we have the evidence to actually invest in these areas, and we're hearing it from Dan on what is the business case. So let's talk a little bit. The funding is there, right? So how can we make this more effective? I mean, I have my vision that we have overcomplicated, perhaps, and this coming from the civil society angle, we have overcomplicated the accessibility of these funds, and sometimes we are perhaps not selling all of the fabulous elements that are there, thinking only about the bankability and the business case of these sites. I mean, if we are not being able to demonstrate the extraordinary value that these wetlands are providing for the future of the planet, and we're only thinking about the bankability and the traditional return on investment type of equation, then are we really going to make it happen? So, two questions for you guys. How can we make funding more accessible and more available to the people who are actually being able to make the change, acknowledging the capacity limitations that Andreas was speaking about, but looking into that catalytic element of mobilizing local resources? And two, are we selling the right elements to try to get these sites protected and restored? So, who wants to jump in?
If I could, I know I've just spoken, but I just wanted to clarify one thing because I'm quite deep in the jargon that we always use, and when we speak about bankability in our team and at Danone, we're not only looking at a traditional financial return on investment, but what we consider as bankable projects is projects that, yes, they generate a return on investment, so they can either generate some cost savings for the local communities, or they can generate some kind of revenue increase. So through, as I've said before, carbon credits, for example, integrating these into the carbon markets, and at the same time achieving positive impacts locally, environmentally, socially. So I just wanted to clarify that. And yeah, I think what we need to overcome is really this working in silos of the private sector and the public sector. So I would really like to pledge for increased cooperation and pooling risks and pooling resources, because we all have our own, we all have resources and we have different strengths. So working together could help. And for example, at Danone, or as a private sector company, we can invest some seed funding. We can start with small sums to prove the business case, and then we believe that we can then leverage other funding sources to really scale these up. And a key point for that is also local capacity building, because not just for wetlands restoration on the ground we lack local capacities, but also to design projects in a way that are attractive to funders. And yeah, we actually just 2 days ago launched a new training on water stewardship and on wetlands restoration and building the business case, developing projects that have a business case behind them, that are bankable, as we call them, together with Ramsar and the WWF. So I think that's already a great achievement that could help towards these efforts.
Great. Can you tell us where that project got? I mean, what is the location of the WWF Ramsar project?
Yeah, so the main aim was really to have a free and publicly available training. So it's free and open to all. So we really encourage everyone to enroll. And maybe it's easiest if I post the website into the chat. So it's
That'd be great.
Bankable Nature Solutions, but I'll post it.
Okay, thank you so much, Carla. Warren.
Yeah, I think that first off, the answers to your question are that it's never going to be as easy as you would like to access the money, because there are accountabilities and you know, particularly when you're dealing with a multiple donor-based initiative, every donor has a different ruled book, and as does every institution like ADB. But having said that, first, let me invite Danone and GCF to join our regional Flyway initiative. I think you'll find what you're looking for there. But I think, Patricia, the key thing for getting access to funding at the local level has been demonstrated through other poverty reduction focused initiatives, where large sums of money are allocated, often with sovereign loans, so government's guaranteed at the national level, but where decisions on investments are made at the local level. Mm-hmm. So it's called community-driven development. We're actually launching a new initiative Monday for using that model for adaptation planning by local communities. That, I think, is similar to what we did in the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund, the CEPF, which is really, how do you put together a fairly large pot of money, but design it in a way that that decisions are taken at the local level, and that those actions are implemented by the local people at the local level, so they own it. An absolutely critical factor in making that work is capacity. And so I think that, for example, just a quick example, the Jiangsu wetland project in China was a highly successful wetland conservation restoration project. It was about, I think, maybe $27 million from ADB, some GEF grant money, a couple of $1 million of GEF grant money, and $30 million from the government of China. That ended up in restoring almost 5,000 hectares of wetland protected area, generated thousands of jobs. It's generated ecotourism benefits very quickly, 1 million visitors per year, and it was instrumental in getting the the World Heritage Nature Site that you were so instrumental in getting. So that was very much locally driven. It was local government that drove that. It was a combination of funding from different sources, but there was a huge, and thanks to the GEF grant money and some ADB grant money, there was a huge effort for capacity development in those local communities, both government and community leadership. And I think that we can't underplay the critical importance of building that local capacity to make these work. And as you know from the CEPF, that was the first step, build capacity, both government and civil society. And so I think if you do that, there are ways to design funds. There are plenty of examples where pretty large pots of money are put together that are absolutely driven and accessible at the local level. So it's all in how you design it and making sure that you do build that capacity so that it works. Because if it doesn't work, so as you said, Dannon's looking for examples of what works. You guys are reviewing that all the time. If it doesn't work, then you're not going to get the money. So I think there are examples, and we need to build on those. Thank you.
Agreed, yeah. So let me turn it to you, Andreas, because as you said, the Green Climate Fund is the biggest fund for climate. No question about it. Billions of dollars available for climate mitigation and adaptation, but still possibly not moving at the fast pace that we would like to see, and also possibly not reaching out to the hands that may be able to make all these different changes. I mean, from the evaluation unit, your lessons about agility and how to make this work in a more fluid way. Tell us a little bit more about that and making funding more available and accessible.
No, thanks again for the question, and Warren, thanks for the invitation. Gladly received. Look, you're right. It's definitely a question of access, as much as it's a question of how to understand the GCF in its structure. So let me just refer to it from the access point of view. The GCF works with colleagues such as ADB, the MDBs that you all can think of, as well as the direct access entities. And we're very pleased that we are one of the only funds in the climate space that can do that. So we do have the opportunity for direct access funds to come in. That can be anything from a ministry to an NGO to any other organization. So that is good. But let me come to the but. The but is the proof is in the pudding, as we say. When you look at how long it takes to get to this access, we found in the evaluation that we've done in 2019, the first forward-looking performance review, that it takes roughly 1,100 days from the first submission of a document to the first dollar, and that's on average. So we have to be clear about the issues that we have at the GCF, and those are clearly linked to the question of access, and it has been so in the past. We have progressed quite a bit in recent years. It's yet to be seen in the next performance review that we do, but that is certainly an issue that requires tackling. Equally, the GCF is also the only climate fund that has the opportunity to work directly with the private sector. So we do have a private sector facility that can work around those things that other organizations may not be able to do as quickly, such as the GEF. But here again, we require the same access as I just mentioned. So it's very difficult to get very innovative organizations such as the NONA or anyone else to come on board with the GCF in a partnership and work on projects that we could do in the future. So that's something that we have been reviewing just this year with the evaluation of the private sector. And what we found is exactly what Warren said. We need to look at catalyzing, because that is one of our mandates of the GCF. And so far we have been concentrating on the mobilizing of funds and less so on the catalyzation. But equally, in the same light, we've also said that coming from the perspective of capacity, we ought to look at the countries because the GCF is bound to its principle of country ownership, that the countries have the capabilities and the opportunities to work together with their local private sector. And what we found, for instance, in an evaluation on the small island developing states is the complexion of private sector in the countries is not well understood by the GCF. And that's something that we need to work on. We have one program that is called the Enhanced Direct Access, which looks at communities on the ground and how we can provide programs that have a larger pot of money that is then distributed down to the NGOs and the community-led activities. But unfortunately, it's not been utilized enough. So again, I think it's for the GCF, to summarize, it's a combination of trying to be better with the access, trying to create true awareness about our private sector mandate as well as the mandate on the activities on the ground, and then perhaps look for partnerships that are viable partners in the region, such as ADB, to think about ways on how we can engage with local contexts more and private sectors more. And I believe that would be something, bringing it in context of the wetlands again, would be something that would be really, really helpful to push activities that, as I said, are really bringing together complex systems from both the human side as well as the environmental side. Because I must say this, we're not in the environment of job. Mm-hmm. That is more of a GEF, the Global Environment Facility. We are truly about climate. That's not to say that we couldn't do it. It's just about a question of realizing that potential as well.
Yeah. But also bringing in the win-win-win opportunities of people, nature, and climate, and wetlands being that linchpin. So before we move on to the next session, let me, and recognizing that this is a Ramsar session, and that is incredibly important, thinking about linking the conventions, and we are, as you said, Warren, it's great to have a wetlands event at a climate convention, but we are going to have the Ramsar convention meeting next year in November in China. The role that the contracting parties play is incredibly important, and the access of financing that these contracting parties have is critical, and it's crucial, and it goes back to the element of capacity, particularly in smaller countries, but also, you know, going back again to the accessibility and being able to catalyze and have that role of catalyzing. How do you see, and I'm going to go to the GCF first, Andreas, how do you see the role of the GCF enabling contracting parties? I mean, you talked about the enhanced direct access, but that's more for local communities. How do we enhance the access to contracting parties?
Yeah, thank you. There's three things that we need to do, and we really need that urgently, because climate urgency is something that we all are aware of, and we should be acting on it. So firstly, we definitely need to find the right partners. We need to think about strategically who are the partners in the space, how can we move forward as partners. And I mean this from both sides. I mean this from the side of those that like to program on the needs of a particular country and think about the needs that are locally there, as well as of those that are trying to find the financial solutions for those things. So we need to think about partnerships in this space. And for the GCF, it would be a lesson to truly create this piggybacking that we always been talking about, the piggybacking between larger international accredited entities and local actors in the space. So that is this partnership element I wanted to raise. The next thing is we need to find a way on truly communicating of what's measurable and how we can measure this and how we can set this into a framework that's attainable to the GCF as well as to the private sector. Because one thing that we found is when you think about complex systems, the cause to effect relationship is notoriously difficult to describe and identify, and that's something that investors will most often think about, at least those that work with the GCF, and how can we translate the impact that we are after with our activities, and for the private sector, most importantly, how can we think about impact investing, as you said. I think that's a credible opportunity. And thirdly, and lastly, we need to think about true country ownership. In a sense, and I really truly want to say this, It's not about the governance in the country. It's not about the governments. It's about the people and inclusive processes in the countries so that everyone can come to the table and we strengthen the climate management opportunities in the local spaces. That would be the 3 recipes that we've been providing as overarching learnings from the IAU to the GCF, and I think that they are very applicable to this discussion, very much so.
Great, thank you. Carla, just one quick one from you in terms of the role of the other companies in the industry. Danone is a leader in the food industry. How do you see your peers? How do you see the other private companies? Are they seeing wetlands as an opportunity? A lot of companies actually depend on the water that wetlands are producing. How do you see it in the rest of the industry?
So I think this is actually an important point, because we hear from a lot of companies, including Danone, that the ambition, because water is a shared resource, including wetlands and the services they provide, that they are increasingly aiming to work on a pre-competitive basis. And for the moment, I feel like that is quite a lot of talking, but not a lot of doing. So I would love to see some real projects on the ground where companies actually work on a pre-competitive basis, knowing that, as I've just said, water is a shared resource. And I think that we could make a very important first step in, as I've said now multiple times, developing pilot projects that really prove this concept. So, for example, that wetlands can be a cost-effective alternative to wastewater treatment infrastructure. If we have some projects on the ground that clearly demonstrate this in a measurable way, then I think we can get more and more companies involved and to scale up these efforts.
Great, thank you so much. All right, let's move into countries and getting this happening on the ground. And let me start with you, Rosa Maria. The Dominican Republic and the wide use of the Caribbean wetlands perspective. Tell us a little bit more about this exciting IKI initiative that has just started.
Hello, good morning. I am Rosa de la Cruz, Director of International Treaty of the Dominican Republic, Minister Environment. Hola a todos, mi nombre es Rosa de la Cruz, soy directora de Convenios y Tratados Internacionales de República Dominicana en el Ministerio de Medio Ambiente. Dominican Republic as coordinator of the Ramsar Regional Initiative for Caribbean Wetland. It's very pleased to share our experience, in particular to the project's wide use of Caribbean wetland of climate change mitigation and conservation of the ecosystem service, funded by the International Climate Initiative, IKI, of the Federal Minister Environment in Germany. The project implements in the following 8 countries: Antigua y Barbuda, Belice, Cuba, República Dominicana, Granada, Jamaica, San Lucia y Suriname. The project was prepared by the focal point of the Ramsar Convention on the member of the Caribbean Regional Initiative, with the support of the Ramsar Secretariat on the main priorities of the government. El proyecto ha sido preparado por los puntos focales del convenio de Ramsar, bajo el soporte de la Secretaría de Ramsar, observando las prioridades de los gobiernos que hemos mencionado anteriormente. The actors to the benefit from the projects are Ramsar Administration Authority of the participant country, national, regional, and local government, National Environment Agency, productive sector, example, tourists, local stakeholders, and community. El proyecto tiene diversos actores que involucra tanto a las autoridades nacionales del convenio de Ramsar, involucra también el grado nacional, regional y local de los gobiernos, involucra las agencias relacionadas con medio ambiente, los sectores productivos, así como también personas de importancia y las comunidades. The project amends the revision, modification, or development of the national policy and the inclusion of the wetland benefits in the sectoral plans and policies is each of the participant country. The project also amends to the Climate Effective Convention and the wide measuring of Caribbean wetland. And the enfocal the ecosystem service and the vulnerable and the 21 present sites to the climate change and the monitor the projects will provide the participant, the government with around information on the wetland. El proyecto tiene diversos objetivos, dentro de ellos está revisar las políticas nacionales sobre los planes del sector de los humedales, también la implementación efectiva para el uso racional de esos humedales, así como también enfocan en la revisión de los servicios de ecosistemas vulnerables de 21 sitios Ramsar. The main impact of the project will be the reconfort legislation will provide partner in stronger capacity on conversion and sustainable use on Caribbean wetland. Of all case player. El impacto del proyecto involucraría la revisión de las legislaciones de todas las partes, así como también generar mayor capacidades para la conservación y el uso sostenible de los humedales en el área del Caribe. And finally, the project contributed to the Ramsar Convention strategic plan, the Aichi target, the Convention de Diversidad Biológica, following the Sustainable Development Goals in the Goal 6 Water and Sanitation. Is the project specifically contribute to the project in the climate and environment, the policy, and especially in the 9DC implementation. Thank you por escucharnos.
Thank you so much, Rosa Maria. And this is a very important Caribbean-wide initiative that is just being launched with ICI for reviewing the policies of the governments in regards to management and conservation of wetlands, but also the rational and sustainable use and ensuring the provision of environmental services in 21 of the Ramsar sites across all of these 11 countries, which is fantastic news for the Caribbean, fantastic news for wetlands, and fantastic news for the Dominican Republic. Doug, I don't know if we have him online. Why don't you take it over until Mr. Oditi comes from, and hopefully he will join us from Uganda. It's great to see you. Good-looking spoonbill sandpiper behind you. So tell us a little bit more about the East Asian Australasian Flyway partnership, how you're mobilizing wetland conservation and financing for that, and of course you pull a plug on our wonderful initiative.
Thank you very much. The key word in the way we do things is about partnerships, and so here we've developed a partnership over the past 20 years, and it has several groups of partners. The most important partners are the national government partners, and we have 18 national governments across the Flyway that are part of the partnership. Their role is critically important because they're the ones who say yes or no about things within the countries. We have 6 intergovernmental organisations, so we're bringing together at our meetings of partners the Convention on Migratory Species, the Ramsar Convention, FAO, ASEAN Biodiversity Centre, Convention on Biological Diversity, and also the Conservation of Arctic Flora and Fauna. So there we have a mechanism where we have national governments, we have the intergovernmental organisations being exposed to the discussions across these groups. We also have 13 international NGOs, including the big names, WWF, BirdLife International, and including some much smaller ones that are still involved in doing international projects for the conservation of migratory water birds and their habitats. The efforts of the partnership are focused at the core is building a network of sites that no one country can conserve migratory water birds. They are moving across many countries backwards and forwards each year. So what partnership is working to do is to link the Flyway together, the important sites that migratory birds are using, and bringing together the knowledge, the enthusiasm, and the innovation of our variety of partners. We've recently recognised we need some more mechanisms, and at the moment we are working on guidelines for national partnerships and also for site partnerships. And this is part of the theme of how the partnership works, bringing people together and working to identify and conserve important habitats for migratory water birds. So in the last 12 months, we've developed a close relationship with Asian Development Bank and alongside BirdLife International, who've been encouraging Asian Development Bank for some time to get involved in this area of work. So now, through the last 12 months, we've worked closely with ADB staff and provided input about how the partnership works and how we see we can work together for both the conservation of migratory water birds, for restoring the ecosystem services of internationally important wetlands, and also seeking to address issues of livelihoods in some of the countries where these depend on these internationally important wetlands. So, very ambitious agenda, but we are really pleased about how it is developing and the enthusiasm that it's generating. We've run a number of webinars with our national government partners to brief them and to encourage them to start thinking about in their country where are important wetland sites that this loan facility could be used to generate major returns. And we see that as in implementing this project, national governments will also get great insights to how to address some of the impacts and the mitigation strategies for climate change, and also build a lot of skills about how to restore ecosystem services in wetlands. So we're really excited. It's a great time, and we really look forward to working with national government partners and ADB in the rollout of this program. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Doug. And yes, Regional Flyway Initiative for the East Asian Australasian Flyway is going to be an extraordinary opportunity of bringing together climate and nature, blended finance, governments, local civil society, and local communities and Indigenous people. But it's a perfect opportunity to showcase how we can work at the scale level and then take that into the other flyways of the world that have networks of wetlands all over. So thanks so much for that. I don't think we have our Uganda, we don't have the representative from the Ugandan government, right? Yes? No? Yes? No? Okay. So let's go back to the difficulties of implementing at the country level, and Doug with you at the regional level as well. Let's make sure that we don't lose him from the screen. So Rosa Maria, how important is this project for the Dominican Republic, the one that you guys are having with IKI? And feel free to do it in Spanish, and I am happy to translate.
Thank you. The project is very important to the Dominican Republic, but is the perfect moment es el momento perfecto para existe una sincronía entre todos los acuerdos multilaterales ambientales, donde el punto de del cambio climático, en la mitigación y la conservación y la adaptación toman sentido para la implementación de los demás acuerdos internacionales. Entonces, con este proyecto se crea sinergia entre el Convenio de Diversidad Biológica, el Convenio de Cambio Climático y el Convenio de Ramsar, liderado entonces en el enfoque de los humedales para usar de manera razonable los humedales, pero mitigando el cambio climático y haciendo también la conservación de los servicios ecosistémicos.
Okay. So Rosa Maria is talking about how crucial this project is, bringing all the multiple conventions together. So it's not only about wetlands and Ramsar, it's actually climate change, and it's also the Convention on Biological Diversity. And looking into not only the conservation of these areas for their sake of their value, but also for the ecosystem services that they provide. And how this is important at the Caribbean level. So it's exciting to hear about this. I'm going to come back to you, but we now have Alfred Okidi. Welcome. It's lovely to have you. Thank you so much. We know how much everybody's running from one event to the other, so please don't feel bad. We're actually honored and really happy to have you. So get your headphones on, and then Mr. Okidi, you have been leading the implementation of and you're the chair of the Nile Basin Initiative. So for those of us who are not necessarily that familiar with the Nile Basin Initiative, tell us a little bit more about that. How does it work? How are you bringing all of these countries together? And what is the role of wetlands in that initiative?
Thank you. Apologies once more. I was caught up in another meeting, and sorry for coming late. The Nile Basin Initiative is made up of 9 countries where the Nile starts and drains up to the Mediterranean Sea. Our intention and our drive is to make it a commission that gives it a legal entity to take actions on its own. The Nile Basin is privileged and houses some of the big, actually, wetland sites in Africa, and a number of them are actually Ramsar designated sites, and these are towers for water. And wetlands is one of the key areas we are focusing on, and for East and Central Africa, we actually host the Ramsar Convention Office in Uganda. Wetlands appreciation is just coming up in that now it is now that the value of wetland as a tower for water, the ability to sequester carbon, and its role in biodiversity conservation has actually taken center stage. And at the various political levels within the Nile Basin, the issue of wetlands has actually come at the very forefront, and it is actually one of the agenda items. And the drive is actually to restore all the critical and vital wetlands that have been degraded. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alfred, and thanks for chairing this incredible initiative. I mean, the Nile Basin is so important for biodiversity in Africa and for human development. I mean, there's so many people that depend on the Nile, and with climate changing, the role of these wetlands is going to be incredibly important in terms of sustaining the services for those peoples who depend on the system. So let me go back to Doug 1 second and talk a little bit more about financing. Doug, you have been leading the East Asian Australasian Flyway Partnership for the last year or so. How do you see the financing environment? How can we bring in more funding? I mean, we have now this exciting partnership and initiative, and thanks to Warren, we have invited the GCF and Danon to join us. But how are you seeing accessing funding at the regional level? Where do you see the role of the government, and how do you see the role of the private donors as well?
Okay, thank you. As I understand it, it really is all about the national government, and it's the national government who needs to engage with the financing instruments. The work that the partnership has done and the governments have been involved in certainly gives some focus, and with the strategic plan as well, and all of the elements within it, there's quite a strong framework already that can be linked into programmatic activities. I think we should be a little cautious and build through the initial phases of the Asian Development Bank program, and to really fine-tune how to go about implementing these projects, and really learn some of the success stories about engaging local communities. So whilst there's so much pressure to move forward with restoration work, we want to do it well, and it will take us a little bit of time to learn how to do that in the different countries. So I'm not really pushing for a great rush of investment. I think we need to learn from some of the experience and build on that. And I think there is a lot of work that can be done, and for it to deliver for a variety of outcomes. So it will be very valuable investments in restoration, linking to the issues of climate change and also to livelihood. So it's a great potential to deliver across a range of things. And so I think there's lots of opportunity. But I do also think we should be careful about how we progress that investment, unless we can clearly show the benefits, both at the local level and at the national level. We need to make sure that that investors are confident that to further support these type of programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. And yes, I absolutely, we have to be cautious, but I think we have an extraordinary opportunity to move things forward much quicker, because these initiatives, both three of them, in the Caribbean, in the Nile Basin, and in Asia, are showcasing how we're bringing together climate, biodiversity, and the Ramsar Convention. So huge opportunities to really bank in and bring in sources of funding from multiple resources. I mean, Andres was talking about the role of the GEF for biodiversity, the role of the GCF for climate. Definitely we have to look into private funding and the private sector, but also the private foundation and the private philanthropy. So let me go back 1 second. We're trying to open this up for the public that has put questions, but while we do that, Alfred, let me get back to you for 1 second in terms of the Nile Basin Initiative. Do you see this as an opportunity of bringing multiple sources of funding together? How are the countries that are part of the initiative feeling about that, and how do you see it coming?
Okay. Just for clarity, the Nile Basin is made up of countries. You have Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan, Sudan, and Egypt. And the way some of these natural resources like swamps are, they don't follow political boundaries. Hence the need to go and tackle the issues around it in a regional manner. So for us in the Nile Basin, that is the approach we have taken. And we have tackled the development in the Nile Basin under two development streams. There's what we call the Eastern Equatorial and then the Nile Equatorial, which is the southern part. And we have projects, for example, between Uganda and Congo to address issues to do with wetlands that cut across the border. We have the same also tackling between Uganda and Kenya. We have another one between Uganda and Tanzania. We have between Kenya, because these wetlands straddle the boundaries. So it is very important that when we go for the funding, we go for funding that addresses solutions in all the affected countries. And we see therefore the role of the Nile Basin Initiative as the coordination hub for profiling, developing the projects, and then also coordinating the implementation. Implementation is actually at country level. So the Nile Basin Initiative certainly is a huge driver in wetlands conservation in the basin.
Okay, and you're playing an incredibly important role connecting all of these actions throughout the Nile Basin.
Yes.
And going, as you say, nature doesn't respect borders and climate change doesn't either.
Yeah.
So let's go to the Caribbean 1 second and talk a little bit more about the importance of this initiative as an opportunity to bring in funding from other sources. So whether it is biodiversity or whether it is, you have already funding from the International Climate Initiative from the German government, Ramiki, but how are you all seeing it, all of the 11 countries seeing it as an opportunity to bring funding from other sources as well? Okay, thank you.
Como coordinador, ¿cierto?
Sí, ¿cómo ves esto como una oportunidad de traer fondos de otras fuentes, como biodiversidad o como sector público o privado, porque son humedales que están en la confluencia de todas las diferentes convenciones? ¿Cómo podemos usar esto para una oportunidad de tener fondos de otras fuentes?
Entendería. ¿Lo puedo decir en español?
Sí, sí.
Perfecto, gracias.
No, tranquila.
Las convenciones para implementarse necesitan financiamiento. Y el financiamiento es para dar más capacidad, lo que estamos diciendo esta mañana. Generar más capacidades y si generamos más capacidades para nuestros técnicos, apoyamos también la parte de la educación ambiental. Eso entonces recoge todo el ciclo, tanto el sector público como el sector privado. Y como el proyecto va a ser a nivel regional del Caribe, entonces el impacto va a ser, el foco va a ser República Dominicana, pero va a ser un impacto en ocho países. Por tanto, donde se van a revisar políticas internas que podrían dar al traste de poder modificar y mejorar las políticas, que esas políticas pueden incluir fortalecimiento tanto institucional como el pilar que es el tema de la educación ambiental, que es muy importante.
So Rosa Maria is talking about the importance of the wetland initiative as a catalyzer of building capacity across the Caribbean. The project is going to revise and review legislation and policies internally in each of the countries, in each of the 8 countries, but it's also going to generate all of this emphasis on environmental education that is going to create this capacity to enable the implementation at the national level. The Dominican Republic is the focal point, but it is actually the impact of the project is going to go way beyond throughout the Caribbean. We have 3 questions from the audience for you guys. So let me spell those out, and you let me know who wants to come and help us address them. So the first one is external sources of funding or donor-based funding is very limited in terms of the scale and also sustainability. Are there any efforts in your different organizations to build capacity of developing countries to establish self-sustainable financing mechanisms at the national level? Who wants to take that one?
Yeah,
go for it.
Well, it's absolutely correct that we're a drop in the bucket compared to the finance that's needed to address development in general, and particularly if you look at the investments required for climate resilience, low carbon development, biodiversity conservation. You know, we're just a tiny amount of money. What we do in many cases to try and build sustainable capacity and commitment at the national level is to do policy-based lending. So we provide loans to governments that really focus on the government's capacity to mobilize resources, to have the right legislation, legal basis, the right governance, and the right institutions to be able to do that. But at the end of the day, it's very much up to the government where they invest that money. Mm-hmm. So a lot of what I think what we're going to see in the future will be policy-based lending, which focuses on, in fact, we're about to do the first one in the Philippines, that focuses on climate change, that focuses on the nature-based adaptation requirements for climate change, to build, you know, where governments are really keen to do that. Once they get that capacity, then it's the domestic resource mobilization that really will provide the funding to implement these measures. So it's an absolutely correct question to ask, because if you know, you add up all the multilateral development banks, the Green Climate Fund, the GEF, all of us together are just a tiny drop of what's required. So we are really we are playing a catalyzing role much more than just funding projects. Thank you.
Thank you. Alfred?
Yes. Just to add on, in Uganda, we have actually, for the first time, had a facility for climate change, which is a landscape approach based on nature solutions. And this we went for blended financing. So it is a project that is going to tap into the lending from the World Bank. It is also as a grant from the component from the World Bank, and also a grant from GCF. So that what we are able to do now is a lot more than what we would have done if we had accessed money from the GCF alone. So I think the issue of approaching it from a blended finance, so that the quantum of work that you're going to do is a lot bigger, is something which will be a game changer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alfred. Okay, next question. What is the role of local and indigenous communities in wetland conservation and at the national and global levels? Anyone who wants to talk about local and indigenous peoples? No?
I can.
Yes, please, Alfred.
We have a number of projects around wetlands, and one of them is actually funded by the GCF to the tune of $24 million, and UNDP $2 million, and then government of Uganda $18 million. The way this project is structured, the initiation of what activities to be done, we first had to engage with the local people. We set up committees, and these committees are actually comprised of local people, supervised by experts from the center for the implementation of the project. So local people are crucial. They understand their local environment better, and when you involve them, there's buy-in. And when there's buy-in, then there's the issue of sustainability becomes a factor. Local people go to wetlands to destroy because they need livelihood. So our experience with them is that provided you take care of their livelihood, then they can coexist and wisely use the wetlands. Thank you.
Great. Doug? You're muted. Hold on. Can we unmute him?
I can.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
With the Flyway partnership, we have a number of Flyway network sites which are Indigenous areas, both in New Zealand and in Australia and in Alaska. And here the governments work with the Indigenous communities and the traditional owners of the area. And in the recent Australian example, by the Indigenous rangers and the traditional owners nominating it as a Flyway network site, they're really exercising, an act of sovereignty over the area as well. So they really have appreciated this linking in to an international framework and being able to really make a contribution to biodiversity conservation. So we will continue to try and develop those activities more. But yes, we find a lot of rewarding experiences coming from that engagement of the Indigenous people on important sites for migratory waterbirds.
Yeah, absolutely. And the role of local communities and Indigenous people, as Alfred said, is not only that extraordinary traditional knowledge that they have of wetlands, but their opportunity of job creation at that level for the restoration of these sites and the conservation of them. All right, one more question. A key aspect in developing a coordinating body at national or subnational levels is that we need to ensure coordination between public and private restoration initiatives that can assist local communities to apply for and gain access to funds for local restoration activities. How do you see these coordinating bodies, and are we supporting the creation or enhancement of these collaboration bodies? Anyone?
Okay. We have what we call circles, or they are cooperatives, but at a very local level. We have created them for water resources. And our water resources, the sources are actually farms in a number of places. So these are cooperatives that we are nurturing, and we give them the seed but revolving fund that they use not only for the conservation of the wetlands, but also for their aspect of livelihood. It is a project that we have started, and I think we are just about 1.5 years into it, but already the results are promising because the demand for funding is more than what we can provide. So getting the local people organized into a group makes it easier to coordinate restoration activities. So for us at the center now, we deal with the heads of the cooperatives and we guide them and monitor their activities. So I think that is something that we have started piloting in Uganda.
Yeah. Great, thank you, Alfred. Warren?
Can I just add, I think there are examples. I talked about community-driven development earlier. The community includes the private sector. In fact, it's dominated by the private sector. There are a number of good examples, and I think they're only examples because it's not near as normal practice as it should be, but where national industry, national private sector recognizes the values of the conservation or different types of utilization of natural resource basin, including wetlands, to their business model. And so I think that that's very much what Dannon is doing is you know, I'm sure that it's part of it's out of the goodness of their heart, but it's mainly a business-driven decision to help work with local communities to conserve resources that are important for the business model of the private sector. What we don't do near enough of is think about that early on in the process of development planning. And I think maybe in the Flyways initiative, this will be a good example. In the example I gave for China, the Jiangsu wetland, the private sector was deeply engaged in that entire process. But I don't think it's the norm. I think it's something that we have to improve on dramatically. Thanks.
Yeah.
Alfred?
Yeah, just to add to that, the private sector actually, I think there is a gap between governments who are actually in charge of the wetlands and the natural resources and the private sector. They are actually keen. And in Uganda, we started by engaging the breweries because 95% of their input is from the natural resources, water, which is actually from the swamps. And we have had 2 of the breweries actually involved in restoration of the swamps. They even went further and went into tree planting, and they have now created their own forum, and they have created running out of trees program, which is dubbed as roots, and they want to mobilize the private sector to annually plant at least 100 million trees. So there's a big divide between the policy makers and the private sector, which requires for conscious efforts to tap into that. Because they're simply using their own resources to plant these 100 million trees in Uganda. So I think it is an area that we need to work on to tap into these resources in the private sector.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think a lot of great points have just been mentioned, and as you so rightly say as well, the starting point of the private sector to engage in these projects is first and foremost to address the business risks, and implementing projects in order to reduce this business risk. Of course, the main objective is to have high impacts over a long time, and to reach this sustainability, it is obviously very, very crucial to not just engage with local communities, farming communities around the production sites, but also with the public sector. So I think if we look at civil society, public and private sectors, these have to come in multi-stakeholder governance forums. So there needs to be a really standardized, or not a standardized, but a really formalized governance approach in every project area, and that includes not just the local public sector, but also up to the national level. And there's a lot of things that all parties can contribute, and I think regulations and a change of incentives to facilitate this collective action is really critical.
Great, thank you. And it's definitely one of those opportunities of bringing together, as Alfred was saying, the private sector with the government and the civil society. All right. I think now it's time for me to pass it on to back to the Ramsar Convention. But before that, just thank you all for your fantastic interventions, for the examples from all over the world, and from the great initiative coming from climate, biodiversity, wetlands, all the opportunities that we have to protect nature and restore wetlands as an avenue for climate. With that, I have done my job. Now I'm gone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Patricia. Thank you to all the panelists. It's been a very, very rich discussion, so I really appreciate that. We've heard perspectives from a number of different angles, global and regional financing institutions, the private sector represented here by Danone, with whom we have a very close and long-standing partnership, including on this training that was launched here just the other day. Thank you for that. We've heard from a Flyway partnership, which is one of the Ramsar regional initiatives, very positive. Patricia, thank you so much for moderating. As one of the international organization partners of the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands, it is fantastic to have this collaboration. in a climate context, and I would echo very much the point made at the earliest part of the event to say that we do need to have wetlands discussions, we do need to have wetland convention discussions in the context of climate and at the climate convention meetings to make more of the opportunities that we have before us, and I'll get to that in a few more moments. But most important here in the session, I would like to say that we've heard from countries. We've heard from parties to the Wetlands Convention, parties to Flyway, partnerships around the world. And the importance of that is, of course, that the ultimate responsibility for environmental management, for safeguarding the services on which we depend and so on, rests with these governments. They are the ones that have taken obligations under international frameworks. They are the ones that set policy. They are the ones that create the enabling environment for the finance that we all recognize needs to flow. And so it is crucial that we have those perspectives from different parts of the world. It's crucial that we've heard from the Caribbean, where we collaborate on a new project that I would look forward to really making the most of. This session has certainly served to contribute to that discussion and that project as well. And so it's wonderful to have you here. Let the discussion continue much beyond the event. I think through wetlands we really have this opportunity to achieve multiple objectives. We're here at a climate meeting. We are all very conscious of the biodiversity benefits. We are all conscious of the sustainable development benefits. And this is an element of complexity, but it's also maybe the basis for really getting the financing into place. So we've seen there are many things that slow us down, many things we have to put in place, but when we have taken time to do that really well, I think this will be the basis for actually getting the financing strong, lasting, and at the scale required. Needless to say, that needs partnership. We cannot do that without partnership, and I'm quite happy to say that in this event I think we've shown that we do have both these elements. We have the financial interest and we have the partnership, shown by your presence here today, shown by our long-standing collaboration. And maybe my last point here will be trying to, in one or two short sentences, summarize the sum total of what you have said, and that is really, if we use strategically the opportunities that are most immediate, the grants, for example, and the collaboration to build readiness, to build those projects, to build those policy environments, then we will be able to speed up and scale up investment to the level needed. And so that enabling environment, it won't come easy, as we've seen, but I do believe you've shown very clearly that many of the building blocks are there. We should continue working together to put them together into that framework that really enables the scaling up that the planet so desperately needs for biodiversity, for climate and sustainable development reasons. So with that, thank you so much again. We'll close the event here, and we look forward to speaking to you all very soon.
Thank you.